Honorable Justice Daniel Musinga, President of the Court of Appeal of Kenya. Honorable Justice Jemima Kelly, Judge of the Employment and Labor Relations Court. Honorable Justice David Mugo Mwangi, Judge of the Environmental and Land Court. Honorable Justice Josephine Mongare, Judge of the High Court of Kenya. Prota Sainde, Chairperson, ICJ Kenya. Council Member, ICJ Kenya. Secretary, Purity Makori. Members, Fred Athwok and James Kishuru. Chairpersons Emeritus, Dr. Ken Nyaundi and Kevin Mogeni. Former Executive Director and member of the AJC Committee, Abdul Nur Mohammed. Our partners from KHRC, Martin Mavajina. From India, we have the Director of Emerging Technologies, Information Technology, Electronics and Communication, Department of the Telangana State. From the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, Siddharth Sijoria and Santan Krishnan. From the Internet Freedom Foundation, Gayatri Malhotra, Associate Litigation Counsel, and Aparth Gupta, Observer Trustee of the Internet Freedom Foundation, and Aruneshwar Gupta, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Fellow jurists, journalists, activists, good morning. Today we gather as jurists bound by our shared commitment to justice, democracy, and the rule of law. We are here not only to reflect on the progress and challenges, but also learn from one another, exchange ideas, and strengthen bonds of South-to-South cooperation in a rapidly shifting global order. Kenya and India share profound historical and legal ties rooted in our common law heritage. This foundation, inherited during the colonial past, has since been redefined by both nations in our pursuit of justice and constitutionalism. Both our countries are celebrated for the progressive nature of our constitutions. India's landmark constitution became a model for many democracies, embodying ideas of liberty, equity, and justice. Similarly, Kenya's 2010 constitution stands as a beacon of hope for constitutional reform in Africa, prioritizing devolution, public participation, and fundamental rights. Our nations have also shown leadership in protecting constitutionalism. India's Kasevanga Bharati case, which established the basic structure doctrine, to Kenya's courts striking down unconstitutional amendments and championing judicial independence, we see examples of how jurisprudence can serve as a bulwark against encroachments on democracy. This conference also recognizes the shift of tides in global power. India's rise as a leader in the global south is evident, having surpassed the United Kingdom in GDP and securing a pivotal role in the BRICS and also the G20. Kenya similarly has emerged as a leader in Africa, championing leadership and regional integration and spearheading innovations that have inspired the continent. As we gather here, let us seize this moment to build bridges across borders, strengthen our democracies, and ensure that the global South's rise translate into tangible benefits for our people. Together, we can champion a future where justice, equity, equality, and human rights remain the center of development in an increasingly multipolar world.
Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, jurists, human rights advocates, and not forgetting to mention our partners, good morning and welcome to the 2024 Annual Jurist Conference here in the vibrant city of New Delhi, India. And on behalf of the Kenya section of the International Commission of Jurists, I extend my deepest gratitude for your presence at this significant gathering. And as the Indians say, Su Swagatam, Su Swagatam, that means grand welcome. Okay. This year's conference, under the theme South to South Dialogue on Economic Justice and Citizen Action, holds immense importance for the Global South. It's an honor to convene such a distinguished assembly to deliberate on shared challenges and collective strategies for achieving economic justice and empowering citizen action. India and New Delhi as a venue for this conference is a testament to the power of resilience, innovation, and citizen engagement in addressing socioeconomic inequalities. From its robust democracy to its transformative initiatives in healthcare, digitization, and governance, India offers valuable lessons for the Global South. This setting provides an ideal backdrop for dialogue on economic justice, fostering a space where Africa and Asia can connect and learn from each other's successes and challenges. Economic justice is not just an aspiration, but a necessity for sustainable development and equitable governance. Across the Global South, we witness how economic policies rooted in inequity, corruption, and mismanagement disproportionately affect marginalized communities. These injustices erode trust in governance, strain social services, and undermine the very principles of democracy. An example is Kenya's rejection of the finance bill this year, which imposed excessive taxation on the citizens, exemplifies a growing frustration with such policies. The subsequent public mobilization against corruption and mismanagement mirrors similar movements in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and here in India. These movements underscore the urgency of fostering citizen action and holding governments accountable. Further, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, and digital tools are reshaping the dynamics of citizen participation and governance. These tools offer opportunities for transparency and activism, empowering citizens to demand accountability. However, they also pose challenges such as misinformation and government surveillance. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that technology is harnessed ethically to advance justice and protect fundamental rights. As jurists and advocates of the rule of law, we have a pivotal role to play. Through strategic litigation, constitutional reform, and public interest litigation, we can challenge policies that perpetuate inequality and ensure the governance framework uphold transparency and fairness. Our work must go beyond courtroom, fostering civic education and engagement to empower citizens as active participants in governance. This conference is not just a platform for dialogue, but a call to action. So, through collaborative efforts, Africa and Asia can chart a path towards equitable economic policies, inclusive growth, and accountable governance. By sharing experiences, best practices, and innovative approaches, we can create a unified voice to tackle the systemic challenges that hinder growth and progress. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, particularly the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and Privacy International for their invaluable support in making this event possible. To our distinguished speakers and panelists, your insights will undoubtedly shape the outcomes of this conference. I urge all of us to make the most of this opportunity to engage in meaningful discussions, challenge conventional perspectives, and forge solutions that will leave a lasting impact on our communities. The success of this conference depends on our collective wisdom and commitment to justice and equity. As we embark on this journey of dialogue and collaboration, let us remember that economic justice is not a destination, but an ongoing pursuit. Together, we can build a future where governance is transparent, policies are fair, and citizens are empowered. Thank you all, and I wish you a fruitful and inspiring conference. God bless you all.
Honorable Justice Davis Musinga, President of the Court of Appeal, Honorable Justice Jemima Kelly, Judge of the Employment and Labor Relations Court, Honorable Justice Davis Mugo Mwangi, Judge of the Environment and Land Court, Honorable Justice Josephine Mongare, Judge of the High Court of Kenya, Mr. Protas Saende, Chairperson, ICJ Kenya, Council members of the ICJ Kenya present, Chairperson Emeritus, Dr. Ken Nyaundi, and Mr. Kelvin Mogeni, former Executive Director and member of the 2024 AJC Committee, Mr. Abdul Nur Mohammed, Deputy Executive Director, ICJ, Mr. Dimas Kiprono. From India, the Director of Emerging Technologies, Information Technology, Electronics and Communications Department, the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, Siddharth Sijoria and Sanantha Krishan, Internet Freedom Foundation, Gayatri Molhara, Anushwa Gupta, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India, Senior Counsels, lawyers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am humbled to speak to you on this auspicious 2024 Annual Jurist Conference. Receive warm greetings from my Executive Director, Mr. Davis Malombe, who sends his sincere apologies, whom I am representing for this session. This Annual Jurist Conference serves as a critical platform to delve into critical matters concerning the rule of law, justice, human rights, democracy, and the evolving global issues for the legal fraternity. Through this forum, it is my hope that we shall foster collaboration to safeguard our democratic institutions and to ensure justice for all. The Kenya Human Rights Commission and the Kenyan section for the International Commission of Jurists share a rich history of collaboration and partnership that spans over a decade. On a light note, I am a product of this collaboration as I am a member of ICJ Kenya. We have worked tirelessly to advance social justice and advocate for recognition of communities and to secure their rightful place in Kenya's economy. The efforts of our institutions are and continue to be at the core of our collective missions, that is to safeguard human rights, to promote equitable governance, and to uplift marginalized communities. From securing fair compensation for victims of corporate abuses to facilitating legal identity for stateless communities, our initiatives seek socio-economic inclusion and opportunities for all. This year's annual conference, themed South to South Dialogue on Economic Justice and Citizen Action, is of great significance as it comes at a time when Kenyans and citizens from other parts of the world, including Global South, have collectively confronted numerous challenges and repressive anti-people policies that have had serious implications. The contestation between the state and citizenry is in the society has been a long-standing question since the cradle of humankind. This is mainly due to the inherent nature where human beings tend to be driven by self-preservation, especially in the scramble for the scarce resources and opportunities. As a result, the most influential players end up exercising more control and accruing more benefits at the expense of others. This is a political battle, and it explains why the description by Harold Laswell that politics is a process of defining who gets what, when, and how. It also connects with the statement by French philosopher Jean Rousseau, who observed in 1762 that man was born free, and wherever he is in chains. It is also important. It's also an important human rights conversation, as such situations often lead to gross violations of civil and political rights, normally associated with the realization of civic and democratic space. It is no wonder, under Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, proclaims that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. The aforementioned powerful interests and actors are enabled to achieve their nefarious and elitist schemes and games by laws and policies that are oppressive and repressive. This has been the story of Kenya and many other global South states where the colonial and post-colonial regimes have been preoccupied with advancing their priorities for political and business barracudas. This has led to an infinite struggle between agents of resistance and subjugation. This can be traced back to all the 6 regimes that Kenya has had between 1865 to date. We have witnessed unprecedented excesses as manifested in the capture of parliament, frustration of constitutional commissions and independent offices, threats to media, faith-based and civil society organizations, through weaponization of regulatory and security apparatus, economic recession that undermines the regime's interest in supporting justice and governance agenda and institutions of government, arbitrary arrests, killings, and abductions of Gen Z protesters and other pro-democracy activists, amongst others. Allow me to conclude by emphasizing the importance of integrating human rights principles in economic policies and migration frameworks. It is my hope, fellow jurists, that we shall continue to advocate for the inclusion of marginalized communities into Kenya's economic system, ensuring their empowerment and dignity. By holding governments, corporations accountable and empowering marginalized communities, we can work towards creating a more just and equitable nation. Our shared and ongoing commitments to advancing human rights and fostering inclusive development will continue to shape the future for those in the Global South and create a lasting and positive change for all. I call upon each one of you to stand firm and united in the pursuit for justice, democracy, the rule of law, and progress that reflects the values enshrined in our constitutions. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and the outcomes of this meeting. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone, mostly from Kenya and partly from India. Honorable Justice Daniel Musinga, President of the Court of Appeal of Kenya, Justice Jamema Kelly, Justice Jason Mungere, Justice David Mugo, my friend Protest Sande, the chair of the ICJ Kenya, and my friends, both Jeffrey and Demas. I am calling them friends because we have been interacting for so long with each other. So we matured to call ourselves friends. Karibu. And welcome you all to tell you in the native language, Swagatam, Suswagatam. The very interesting concept which you have brought towards this annual conference of Kenya section of the ICJ is very interesting. And then with a theme called South to South Dialogue, Economic Justice and Citizen Action. And your talking points I was just referring to analysis of the constitutional frameworks of Kenya, India, and other global South nations, and in promoting economic justice and protecting citizens. Achievements, challenges, prospects for strategic impact, and the public interest litigation. I must tell you, public interest litigation is one of the major avocations among the lawyers within India. I would say India is one of the pioneering countries in this field of public interest litigation. There was no concept as such, and this evolving this concept was attributed to one of the judges of Supreme Court, Justice Aruneshwar, just tell his name? Justice Bhagwati, who missed being the Chief Justice of India, but he was the author. From then onwards till date, public interest litigation has been pursued very seriously and vigorously across all the high courts and Supreme Court in India. Your theme, what I could see from your theme was economic justice. From all the conferences that I have been attending, the economics is missing. That's the reason why I would say I welcome this particular theme called economics, because every country, the way in which they are administered, the independence of judiciary, etc., everything is directly linked to the economic policies of each of the countries. So it was very, warmly, welcoming this idea of economic laws and justice to be discussed in such conferences, and that will go a long way in telling people, involving people to speak not only in terms of economic policies of that particular country, but involve people, as you rightly said, people-centric policy should be there. So when we talk about this, the important aspect is we are not just confining to the lawyers and the legal fraternity. We move and then go beyond and also think in terms of citizens as such. In this process, I remember a great saying from a philosopher who says, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Commonwealth Lawyers Association always stands for upholding rule of law, and upholding rule of law is directly connected to the economic justice, the economic policy which every country pursues. With these few words of introduction, may I say, welcome you all on behalf of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. Not only that, but all our colleagues and friends who are from India. A hearty welcome to India, not only to deliberate on the topics which you have chosen to deliberate, but also have a successful deliberation during the course of the day, and enjoy your trip to India. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Our keynote speaker is Honorable Justice Daniel Musinga, the President of the Court of Appeal of Kenya. He was elected to that position in 2021 to serve a 5-year term. Initially, before joining the bench, he had founded Musinga and Company Advocates in 1991, practicing law until his appointment as a High Court judge in 2003. During his legal career, he chaired the Mombasa Law Society of Kenya and the Kenya Christian Lawyers Fellowship, which provided pro bono legal services to the citizens of Kenya. Justice Musinga was recognized as the 2011 Jurist of the Year, ICJ Kenya, and has served in key judicial roles, including presiding judge of the Commercial and Mayoralty Division and the chairman of the Performance Management and Measurement Steering Committee, where he institutionalized performance management in the judiciary. He was appointed to the Court of Appeal in 2012. He also serves as the Vice President of the East African Development Bank Arbitration Tribunal and continues to contribute to judicial reforms and governance in Kenya. Kindly join me in welcoming our chief guest.
In the interest of time, kindly let me adopt the protocols that have been very well laid by those who have spoken before me, except to recognize the Honorable President of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, my friend, Mr. Santan, who I've met today, but I feel like I've known you for a long time. And then another good friend, senior advocate, who was so kind, Mr. Gupta, to give me a book this morning. Mr. Gupta, thank you very much. And I learned Mr. Gupta, his grandfather was the Chief Justice, a judge, his father, and now himself. But his children say, no, Daddy, you work too hard. We don't want to go that way. But they're making a lot of money in the careers they chose. It is with great pleasure and appreciation that I stand before you this morning to deliver this keynote address. This conference, under the theme South to South Dialogue on Economic Justice and Citizen Action, could not be more timely. It provides us with an opportunity to have frank and constructive exchanges on the pressing economic injustices that continue to plague the global South. Together, we must chart transformative pathways that foster inclusive growth, justice, and citizen-driven accountability. Developing economies in the global South continue to face multiple crises that hinder their progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The global South remains mired in structural inequalities that impede sustainable development. Debt dependency, control of terms of trade by the global North, coupled with public resource mismanagement, challenges such as corruption have entrenched cycles of poverty. To disrupt these cycles, governments must implement progressive fiscal policies that address corruption, tackle illicit financial flows, and reallocate budgets to address citizen priorities, particularly in health, education, and climate adaptation. Yet, amidst these trials, the global South also stands at a precipice of immense opportunity. As regions rich in human and natural resources, we have the tools to forge new paradigms of equitable growth, paradigms that build on solidarity, inclusivity, and citizen-driven accountability. As jurists, we must champion transparency and accountability in all government operations and undertakings. We have a duty to ensure that the citizenry is well informed about laws, policies, and regulations that are passed, because knowledge is power, and corruption thrives where there is ignorance and lack of transparency. We should therefore do our best to promote effective public participation in the enactment of laws and the implementation of public policy decisions. Economic reforms cannot exist in isolation. They require robust legal frameworks and institutions to guarantee fair labor practices, uphold property rights, and promote transparency. For example, social safety nets must be fortified to shield marginalized communities from shocks caused by economic downturns or climate catastrophes. The current global financial architecture exacerbates these inequalities. And according to the African Economic Outlook 2024, and I quote, Africa's sovereigns face higher costs of financing in international capital markets than advanced and emerging economies, given their perceptions of risk and resultant mispricing of their sovereign debt by international investors originating from unfavorable credit ratings. In 2021, African sovereign Eurobonds were issued with yields above 5%, and in 40% of cases, yields exceeded 8%. In contrast, the average sovereign bond yield for advanced economies was 1.1%, and for emerging markets and emerging market economies, 4.9%. It has been estimated that African countries are paying 500% more in interest costs when borrowing in international capital markets than when borrowing from the World Bank or other multilateral development banks, such as the African Development Bank, unquote. Fellow jurists, as a result, most governments allocate a significant portion of their revenue to public debt service, which leaves them with insufficient funds to adequately invest in essential services such as health, education, and social protection. Further, the public debt restructuring mechanism put pressure on public finances and are lengthy, creating liquidity problems for countries in debt distress, while a lack of meaningful participation in resource allocation decisions by developing countries exacerbates their marginalization in global economic governance. The world economic situation and prospect for 2024 states that developing countries face high levels of external debt and rising interest rates, making access to international capital markets difficult. There is a decline in official development assistance and foreign direct investment for low-income countries. Public debt sustainability has emerged as a critical challenge, especially for developing countries, in the wake of rising public debt levels and changing global financial conditions. The increase in global interest rates, a consequence of monetary policy tightening by central banks like the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, has escalated public debt servicing costs, particularly for countries with foreign currency denominated debts. As a result, many countries are grappling with the need for public debt restructuring, including renegotiating terms or seeking public debt relief to manage their escalating public debt burdens more effectively. These challenges demand immediate and collective action to reform global financial systems, ensuring equity and inclusivity for all. Despite the significant power exercised through public debt, citizens are increasingly resisting its impacts and realities. In Kenya, widespread protests, as you know, erupted in response to the Finance Bill 2024, which introduced a series of new taxes and fiscal measures. These measures aimed to broaden the tax base, but came amid mounting socio-economic challenges, including the rising cost of living, corruption, limited transparency, unemployment, and declining access to essential services such as healthcare and education. The nationwide protests reflected the frustration with the proposed taxation and a broader rejection of government failures, lack of accountability, and erosion of public trust. Citizens demanded a government that prioritizes their welfare over economic policies that disproportionately burden the poor and the middle class. These demonstrations underscore the vital role of public participation in decision-making and the power of citizens as active stakeholders in governance, advocating transparency, equity, inclusivity, and accountability. Such movements, ladies and gentlemen, are not unique to Kenya. Across the global south, similar protests have unfolded in countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka over economic issues, ranging from austerity measures to fuel price hikes and against economic mismanagement and soaring public debt. These protests signal a growing wave of citizen resistance against economic policies that intensify inequality and fail to address the structural roots of poverty. They also highlight the urgent need for governments to engage meaningfully with their citizens, ensuring that economic reforms are inclusive, transparent, and aligned with the priorities of the people. Despite the difficulties, the Global South is packed with potential for transformative growth. The digital revolution, green energy initiatives, and intra-regional trade offer dynamic avenues for development. By embracing technology, we can revolutionize access to education, healthcare, and financial services, thus empowering citizens to actively shape their economies and their destinies. Digital tools and artificial intelligence are poised to redefine governance, accountability, and service delivery. From AI-driven legal research aiding judicial efficiency to digital platforms enhancing public participation, technology presents immense possibilities that lie ahead of us. However, these tools must be wielded responsibly with safeguards to prevent any abuse or misuse. Equally critical is the South-to-South cooperation. Initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area and the BRICS Alliance exemplify the transformative power of regional partnerships. Through shared learning and coordinated action, these alliances can unlock markets, foster resilience, and drive growth rooted in the Global South's priorities. It is crucial to note that economic justice is not solely the responsibility of governments. Citizens and civil society must lead in shaping equitable growth narratives. Advocacy, litigation, and organized resistance are vital tools for demanding transparency, equity, and inclusivity in public decision-making processes. We jurists must also confront rising threats to democracy, such as internet shutdowns. These actions, often justified under the guise of security, undermine freedom of expression and access to information. In an era where digital platforms are indispensable for civic participation, such measures stifle citizen agency and erode trust in governance. Protecting digital rights must become central to our fight for justice. Ladies and gentlemen, this gathering is not merely a platform for reflection, but a call to action. As jurists, we hold unique positions to drive change. How can we leverage our influence to create just, inclusive societies? That's a fundamental question. The answers lie in forging cross-border alliances, amplify marginalized voices, and championing the rule of law as a cornerstone to economic justice. Let this conference inspire a renewed commitment to equity and sustainability. The Global South possesses the tools, knowledge, and collective will to redefine growth trajectories, ones rooted in justice, equity, and shared prosperity. Together, as jurists, let us rise to this challenge and make it our enduring legacy. Thank you very much.
I'll start by laying a context in which, according to the OECD, apparently one of the biggest challenges right now in governance is that there is a global dip in public trust in government institutions. And this lack of public trust is mostly among young people and women, with about 45% of young people and women saying that they just do not trust the government, they do not trust government initiatives, while about 39% say that they somewhat trust what the government is doing for them. From from the Indian perspective, we've seen a lot of economic growth, a lot of debate about issues such as nationalism, but also a general feeling that the country is growing. You know, there is a sort of a positive air within the optimism within the country. What do you think is the underlying factor there, and what can Kenya learn from that? Senior Gupta.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you for inviting me for this annual conference of jurists. This question is very pertinent, and particularly when we take reference to the young generation. Now, this young generation is what is called the Z generation. And they are quite evolved if you look at them. They are not, because they are not looking at the world which has been classified and devised into various categories. They are, for them, they have moved from a more of a lateral thinking and they're moving to a quantum thinking. So it's a world that they're looking at one glance at a time, and they started living for a moment. Now, one of the basic issues is that all relationships, and I emphasize that, are based on trust. When you drive a car on a road at a speed of 100 miles an hour, you see another car coming from the other side at 100 miles an hour. The trust is that he drives in his lane and I drive in my lane. Now, the breach of trust, all litigation, this is something, and I've been in court for 48 years now. And believe me, every litigation is based on a breach of trust. Whether it is a civil case, it's a civil issue. In a criminal case also, there's a breach of trust or a faith. Somebody runs away with property, somebody puts his knife something, somebody shoots somebody. End of the day, it's all about breach of trust. Now, if you look at the basic problem of why young generation is losing the faith or trust in the governments, is because the democratic governments have got three basic principles. It is by the people, of the people, and for the people. Incidentally, in democracies, they become by the people, they become of the people, but these of the people, these leaders which are being created, are not working for the people. Now that is where the problem comes. And that is where, I may just induct in between, that is where the role of judiciary comes in. That is where the role of jurists come in, the advocates, the academicians, and the judges. They have to work for the rule of law and see that the government works for the people. And the basic reason is what we call as corruption. The corruption is basically, it arises at the root out of individuals. The governments are not corrupt. It is the individuals who are corrupt. And it is the greed for power and greed for money which leads to corruption. If you go back into the history, you see earlier it was power. Like people like Alexander, Genghis Khan, and all these people came out of their countries to win over the other countries, plunder them, loot them. For what? That greed of power. Then we saw a very great, almost like last 400 years, where it was economics, the colonization. Everybody, everywhere in the Commonwealth, except for those who looted or plundered. So whether it was British, whether it was France, whether it was Portuguese, whether it was Dutch, everybody exploited the colonies. And now in democracies, now this is the third phase we have moved into. And in democracies, the leaders who have been elected with the trust the great trust that they will work for the people, they siphon off the funds. And that is where the problem comes. Now, how do you, the whole issue is that the siphoning of the funds has to stop. And that can only be done by judiciary, by picking up the people. And there are a lot of, the whole civil society, one of the, which I call as the fifth pillar, the sixth pillar in fact. Three is the democracy, the three are the governments, legislation, executive, judiciary, fourth is media, and fifth is the civil society. So the rise of the civil society and judiciary, if they join together, I think they can make a major impact and create a trust in the people. As Mr. Santana said, you see this way back, the public interest litigation started by a letter given by a poor lady to one of the chief justices who was going for a tour in Kerala. And he treated that letter as a writ petition. Now that writ petition, if you go strictly by jurisdiction, they will say, no, this can't happen, that can't happen. But you have to get out of these technicalities and go to the public at large to create that trust. Thank you.
Willis, in Kenya, especially with what happened this year in June and July, the Gen Z, as Senior Gupta has put it, mobilized online, mobilized on the streets, and said no to a finance bill that many found problematic. And we saw a lot of public participation and public sensitization that has never been seen through TikTok, through Twitter. That has never unprecedented, where even bills were translated into local languages. So this sort of alludes to a betrayal of trust of some sort. When did the rain start beating us?
Thank you very much, participants and President of the Court of Appeal. And to say this, one thing we must all appreciate is we are living in different times, and the tools available and at the disposal of our young people are tools which were not available to some of us in the past. And those tools have revolutionized the world, not just the country. And if you look at it, look at even the downloads that Kenyans are having, or people in the global south are having. Before, Rihanna, for example, released a song, and you'll see 100 million views in 1 month. Diamond released a similar song also in the same region. He has 100,000 views in 3 months. Today, Diamond is a Tanzanian musician, releases a song, and in 1 day, Diamond is hitting 3 million views. It tells you that the global south has started to listen to itself. And we must start looking at ourselves inwardly as of similar persuasion as the global north. And I want to say, what, for example, triggered the Gen Z revolution? And I want to tie it to the conference conversation. Debt is tax in advance. Debt is actually your tax in advance. But if you are going to pay a tax for a debt that didn't come into your country, that you cannot feel its impact, then at present you are promised more tax to pay for that debt or to even meet the basic social needs of the country today. And you are taxing an individual or a group that have not been able to even within themselves raise any significant income. Now, it was a promise of a bleak future. And with the disposal of technology at their hands, I believe the global south has said no. Look at countries that have gone through similar situations as Kenya on the question of tax. You'll be shocked that in Kenya, in the last 10 years, 2013 to 2023, you've borrowed 5.4 trillion Kenya shillings. And I'll ask you, and these are publicly available information. Before, we never knew that our central bank, for example, issues a gazette notice every second week of the month, telling you actuals of receipts and expenditure, actual amount that you've collected, and now it has been expended. You've borrowed 5.4 trillion. And then you are told, in the same period, you paid 6.7 trillion towards debt finance. But the surprising thing is, Your debt book is still reading 11 trillion. Now, which is this debt that keeps going up, doesn't go down? And that speaks to how are our public finance management systems operating? Are people borrowing money in the name of the people of Kenya or countries in the global south and not applying it to that which is intended? The money is borrowed but does not come into the country. In Mozambique, my favorite country, they took what is called the tuna bond, $2 billion US. The money never entered Mozambique. But the obligation to pay was right inside Mozambique. And they went to court. Civil society groups went to court. And in court, they sued the Attorney General, their parliament, and the National Treasury. The Attorney General and Parliament and the National Treasury were telling the court in Mozambique, Constitutional Court, that we actually have an obligation to pay for this tuna bond. The people are saying this loan was taken without following our laws. We are the sovereign. It's a sovereign bond. But the money didn't come to the sovereign. It was not taken in accordance with the laws of the sovereign. But the state is saying, no, you must pay. What did the Constitutional Court in Mozambique say? No. The people of Mozambique did not borrow that money. All they received was an obligation to pay. The consequence of that court decision, Credit Suisse collapsed. Officials, some of them were taken to court. The former president's son is in jail. The head of intelligence is in jail. The head of the treasury is in jail. Because they said, you actually borrowed money in the people's name without following the people's laws, and the people cannot pay for it. And I'll invite Kenyans in the room. When you talk about Eurobond, you know the surprising thing about Eurobond, we talk about it as a very big thing. But how much of Eurobond, for example, came into Kenya? This year, the Eurobond one matured. Principal payment was supposed to be paid. And the Kenyan people were not able to pay it. And you are told, we have to do a refinance. At the time of the initial loan, the interest rate was 5.6%. In the refinancing model, the interest rate rose to 10.3%. This is a commercial loan. Now you are paying higher interest for a loan that never came into your country, that was taken in a way that does not follow your laws. And I'm sorry for the judges who are in the room. We want to test this. I hope it doesn't come before any of you, but before the judges. We want to apply the Mozambique model and say, if Eurobond was taken and the money didn't come to Kenya, let's see what our courts will say. But at least we are following the footsteps of the court in Mozambique. You also look at this case of Malaysia with the 1 MDB scandal. Again, money taken in the name of the people of Malaysia, money is not applied to the sovereign, and subsequently, at least for the case of Malaysia, JP Morgan was forced to pay back the money. Even part of the interest which they had been paid, they had to release it. And the former prime minister is in jail, and several officials are in jail. We are going to test again in Malaysia what they have done in Malaysia. We want to test it in Kenya and see if in Kenya we can say who is the sovereign. Is it the public or those who are holding public office? Honorable judges, I'm very sorry. Because unfortunately, for us where we are, in fact, it's unfortunate to other people, but fortunately for us, is that the ultimate test of a democracy is in the ability of the courts to assert themselves as the ones who hold the public trust and hold everybody account to their action. So, President, you have a higher role to play in terms of restoring trust, not just in our institutions, but in our governance by itself. Let me not hog much of the time, but
Senior Athwok,
Thank you.
in Kenya, for example, now we find that yet again we have come to a situation where there's no real opposition. And if you go back to our history, in the 60s, Kanu Kadu, there was the absorption of an opposition party. It happened in the late 90s. It happened in the early 2000s. It happened in 2003. It happened with the handshake. And it looks like our political actors usually find a way to come together, usually when there is a national crisis. But was the Gen Z really a national crisis, or was it a time of reckoning? And is that a missed opportunity? Is Kenya the same, or have the political class just reset and continued as usual, as business as usual?
Thank you. Honorable President of the Court of Appeal, Daniel Musinga, and our judges, our friends who are here today. Thank you very much, Dimas, for that question. Dimas, what you have described is actually what has been the history of the Kenyan people. Kenya has had opposition, yes, but at the crucial moments, the people who have driven Kenya to the changes that we enjoy to date, who are not just the opposition, but the people of Kenya, the civil society, and the people who felt that there needs to be change. If you look back to the areas that you have talked about, leading up to the realization of the 2010 Constitution, what the Gen Zs have brought to the fore is the fact that it's Article 1 of the 2010 Constitution that says power belongs to the people. Allow me, and as Willie said, right now the world is a global village. The Gen Zs have captured it. They are the young people. They are the people of Kenya. Actually, if you look at the demography, 60% of our population, even here in India, are the people below 40. For Kenya, it is even lower. They are the majority of our populations. They are the people who feel the need that they don't have incomes, they don't have jobs, their education, their parents are suffering, they're living in deplorable conditions, and they drive the economy and the changes that need to be done. Look at in India. Mahatma Gandhi had to come back from South Africa, where he lived for 21 years, up to 1915, to come and drive the changes that drive India to date. When you go to some of the industries in this country, they believe that for them to have economic transformation, they had to start from their cottage industries, have their own products, however little it was, not to rely on imports. Coming forward, you realize that we are living in a situation where the debt burden, the debt rationale, what they charge African countries for debt is much higher in terms of interest rates. When I was practicing, in my early practice, borrowing from America was 3.5%, actually 3%. And I could see my clients borrowing from America, bring the money into Kenya, and lending at 28, 29%. And our central bank, with all the regulatory powers, were not coming in. The Gen Zs capture these things in the internet at an instant, at a follow-up, on TikTok. And they explain, and they mobilize each other. They have better mobilization tools than our generations had. And as the president said, this is time for action, not reflection. And that's what the Gen Zs have done. On Tuesday, when we were boarding our aircraft coming to Delhi through Dubai, China jailed the chairman of the central bank for accepting a bribe of $16.9 million. Not just jailed, it was a death sentence passed. Judge, you're saying yes, but we are... Because the facts are there, as Willie said. These are hard facts. We might just be bringing a case to court soon for some of us who are in litigation for jailing, for private prosecution, because the facts are there. The decisions that are made, like what you said, we borrowed so much, we took a sovereign bond of so much, and never came to us. So, Dimas, it is not lack of opposition. In fact, in my view, there has never been any strong opposition. It is the forest is the same. No, it's the monkeys. Yeah, yeah, it is the monkeys. So these people keep on recycling, and the Gen Zs have realized this, and it is something they're evolving on a daily basis, so that every time you watch the news, you read the papers, you go into the internet, you realize there's something new that is happening basically on the economic front. On public interest litigation on the action front, I think India has led. If you look at your constitution amendment 46 of 1976, where you brought in now serious economic issues, Kenya Article 43 of the economic rights and social justice issues. We are looking at the areas of health, agriculture, gender, children's rights. They are all now in our constitution. What is remaining is justiciability. For a long time, we were wondering in litigation, how do you actualize these economic rights that we have in the Constitution? Can you go to court and actually say, now I have a right to housing in the Constitution, and I don't have a house, I don't have a dwelling, a decent, as recognized under the international minimum protocols. So these are some of the things that I believe the Gen Zs are up to task. In fact, it is their generation, not ours. For those of us who are in this room, I almost 100% believe we might just be for reflection. Action belongs to the Gen Zs, and they are up to the task. Thank you.
Thank you. This year, KHRC was also sort of caught up in the government's ploy to thwart civil society during the Gen Z movement, really attacking freedom of association. Just to make it clear is that there was an indication that the government was looking into the funding sources of civil society organizations, and the president is on record and the PS Foreign Affairs saying that Ford Foundation money was being used to overturn the government. This is not the first time that has happened to civil society organizations in Kenya. But we are involved in court action together, basically to fight that. So there have been a lot of constitutional safeguards, especially after 2010. But equally, there have been, and you alluded to this in your address, that there have been deliberate measures to erode these constitutional safeguards. Kindly discuss.
Okay. Thank you for that question, James. Well, when you look at, before I start my discussion, President, judges, jurists, I must admit that for a long time, us at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, the way we view Kenya is an active crime scene. The reason why we say that is that, I mean, for the longest time, public figures commit serious crimes that are akin, basically, actually, the way we would describe them is crimes that are close to crimes against humanity, because we've seen public figures stealing huge sums of money, using the legal system to ensure that they're always out of jail. And to date, I don't think we have any serious public figure who's been held to account. I'll give an example of what we kind of confronted in some time this year, and I think Willie Sonathok alluded to it. When a government of convenience amongst the criminals was formed, we actually had an ongoing case against Honorable Paranya. And that case was at an advanced stage with our oversight bodies that are tasked with prosecuting public officers, ready to jail him. So guess what happened? These fellows actually form a government of national unity. A letter is issued, a letter is actually backdated to say EACC is no longer interested in actually pursuing the matter. And this fellow is actually vetted in the next couple of days. And yet we had an ongoing case against him. So before we knew it, the case is actually overtaken by events and nobody seems to want to touch on it. So the thing that we've been grappling with for a long time is that there's a deliberate, there's been a deliberate effort, despite a robust constitutional framework, existing pieces of legislation, oversight bodies, name it. There's, for the last, I think, 10 or so years, there's been a deliberate effort by those in power to undermine independent constitutional commissions. When you look at most of these oversight bodies that are supposed to provide constitutional guarantees, and safeguards for all of us, or supposed to protect all of us, they've actually been used to recycle political failures. Uh, as we speak today, there have been nominees for the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. I mean, out of a whole host of progressive Kenyans who applied, we have only one progressive person from civil society, that is the ED of Kitui Chasheria. And the cycle has been going on for long. So it's a deliberate effort by the state to actually ensure that political rejects or those who do their bidding actually get into these offices. And once they get into these offices, then they are unable to actually exercise their mandates because you are given that position, so you just have to dance to the state's tunes. But let me allude to what Dimas had said, had asked earlier. Yes, indeed, this year, at the height of the Gen Z protests, the government was looking for anybody and everybody to blame. So initially, they blamed development partners, saying they funded the Gen Z protests. Then they went after, a few personalities in government, including the deputy president, and that may explain why he was hounded out of office. And then finally, they came knocking on our door. We were actually served with a letter from DCI, and the contents of the letter were, if I can just sum it up, they say that the Kenya Human Rights Commission and AFRICOG and a few other partners have been funding the Gen Z protests. And because we've been funding the Gen Z protests, the Gen Z protests led to destruction of property under a threat to national security. So the long and short of it is that we're actually accusing us of treason, and yet they had not presented any iota of evidence. So what we did when we received those letters is that we moved swiftly to court, and we actually sued the state, and by extension, also added the DCI and the National Police Service to the suit. So that suit is still ongoing, and we have received two progressive orders from court. So what we've been able to do in the past is we've been able to employ the use of strategic public interest litigation to guard against repressive or regressive state policies. And that is primarily because a couple of years ago, prominent civil society organizations like Muhuri and Africa had their accounts frozen for an inordinate period of time. And what is rather interesting when it comes to suits against the state is, yes, you get you get a successful judgment against the state, but getting the actual payment that is awarded to you by the courts is actually a painstaking process because, yes, you get a progressive order, you're awarded costs, but the state just never pays. They keep giving excuse after excuse. This was not planned for this year. So it's a painstaking cycle whereby, and what really pains us as civil society actors is that we sue the state and they still use citizens' taxes to actually pay out these fines. So lately we have changed tact. We have decided to actually pursue public officers in their personal or individual capacities. And one of the discussions we shall explore with the judiciary in the near future is, for instance, when you look at the aspect of police accountability, how do you have specialized courts just trying police officers? These fellows commit crimes on a daily. They just commit crimes on a daily basis, right from taking bribes on every morning. And then for those of us who drive to work, I mean, you'd always see these guys every day collecting bribes. Now that is on the aspect of corruption, but the amount of violations that they subject citizens to in police stations is just astronomical. And the fact that our justice system sometimes takes very long to try one person does not inspire hope in victims and survivors of police excesses. A good example is the case of Willie Kimani, which took 6 years, right? Now, the question we always ask ourselves is how many similar cases like that will be tried for? And just to make it context specific, when you look at the Gen Z protests, we had over 60 innocent Kenyans who lost their lives. As we sit in this room here, not even one police officer has been held to account, not even one. Our oversight bodies like IPOA are telling us, they're investigating, it's the usual, the usual drama, the usual lip service. They tell you we're looking into the matter, but investigations have to have an end. We can't investigate cases forever, right? If you look at some of the violations that have happened in the past elections, there are some cases that are ongoing, and the chorus that our investigation tell you is that we're always investigating. So we need to think more broadly on how do we hold those in positions of power to account. how do you take back our country? Because when you look at the appetite for borrowing that the government of Kenya has, it's just unbelievable. I mean, they borrow on a regular, they're spending recklessly, there are no austerity measures, there are a lot of anti-people policies. We're just being told pay, and pay more taxes, and that does not sit well with very many of us, and that may explain why the youth actually rose. And as much as people may think that there was a lost opportunity because the opposition and the government of the day ganged up, I mean, we are optimistic that we may see a replica of the same, because it is really interesting to, when you reflect back on our last election in 2022, we had 8 million youth who were never bothered about politics. They didn't care who was the president or who was elected into any elective seat. And then 24 or so months later, we have actually 9 million youth who are actually very interested in what actually is happening in our country. So it just shows you, I mean, what these youth are capable for. And I always tell people, and it is my honest feeling, that I think the stakes could be a little bit higher in the next election, because we have a very progressive youth, and as the speakers before me said, they are the ones actually going to take this revolution to the next level, because we must take back our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Willis, we have a court order basically directing IEBC, directing the government to constitute IEBC. That has never happened. We have members of the member of parliament of Banisa, which is a constituency in the north, who died. The member of parliament died. They have no representation. We still have no IBC. There were deadlines for. So that is the independent election running body. They were supposed to do border delineation of constituencies. Never happened. And that was a constitutional. It has a constitutional timeline. And so we see some sort of impunity. And we have gone to court. We have orders. These are political questions now. How do we address them?
Unfortunately, what I must say, what I have to say in relation to Kenya is that it's all deliberate. And next year, I think Kenya will have a date with destiny, if you're discussing Kenya, because this act of impunity at some point gets to people. And when people see that there's no solution to their problems, that is what drives them to the streets. One person who believes that we'll have demonstrations again in Kenya, in fact, a revolution in Kenya next year. Because if the last point is the court has made an order on an issue, the constitution has told you must delimit boundaries within 12 years of its enactment, and you ignore all of them, what options do you still have then remaining? My interactions with other countries, it always ends up being a revolution. And at this rate, if the political class does not take heed of the constitution and what the courts have ordered, then the streets will call and Kenyans will go back to the streets. And this time, I don't know where it will end. Because look at it this way. There's nothing unique that you've seen in Kenya that has not been applied in other countries when people are revolting. The first step is normally a government of national unity, where the political class decide we are going to coalesce to protect our interest. So the broad-based government, in that context, was about the political class saying, why are the people revolting without an opposition figure leading the revolution? Because if an opposition figure leads the revolution, we are guaranteed that there will be some protection and accommodation in the new administration. But in this particular instance, these are faceless, leaderless, partyless revolution. No, we can't accept it. Let's gang up and stop it. They ganged up. But the problems that led people to the streets have not been addressed. They are still present. If anything, they are getting exacerbated. It will take a miracle for this fissure not to erupt next year. And if it erupts, I always implore any judge anytime I meet them, you are our only saviors. To the extent that despite certain decisions coming from the courts that may not be well received by the public. A majority of judgments from our courts have actually tampered public opinion to the extent that they see some progressiveness, they see some commitment to our constitution. So we should not get to a point where judges also start shying away from saying we will continue to uphold the constitution, because that will be the last point of call that will hold our country, if need be. There's something I wanted to say about debt that many Kenyans don't understand. We have, as a country, 5 pockets of debt. We have the London Sovereign Group, those are the sovereign bonds. We have the Paris Club, Chinese debt, and domestic debt. Governments in Africa are now beginning to love more the London sovereign groups. And even the World Bank has warned them against taking the sovereign bonds. Why? Interest rates are higher. The terms of sovereign bonds are more punitive, and there are no conditions attached to it. Whereas concessionary loans, you'll find the interest rates are almost negligible, 2%, and you have a grace period of even 10, 20 years, repayment period of 30 years. But there are conditions and terms which are attached to them. So governments don't want those sovereign concessionary loans. They prefer the sovereign bonds. But it's the sovereign bonds at those high interest rates that are now choking the country. But within it, there's more profit to the political class. Understand politicians that to them they don't live at, they want to see Kenya in 30 years. They want to see Kenya today. How much can I make out of Kenya today? I can make this much today. So why can't I sign my deal, make my money and get out? Few people think of the country. They think about the individual. As opposed to India, where people are discussing plans and policies for the next 30 years. They want to see India in 2060, 2047. It's what they're discussing today. In Kenya, we want to discuss, we are transactional. We've become very transactional in nature. What can I get out of this country today? For myself, not for the country. And it is important that going forward, even as jurists, we must lead the conversation on economic justice. And if we are able to get out of the debt burden, the country will change. And I say this informed by the fact that, remember this, 80% of your tax revenue today, what Kenya revenue collects, 80% of it goes to debt finance. Your government needs 35% to pay salaries. Your government needs 30% for operations. You're already at negative 45. Your government needs 15% to send to counties. You are at negative 60. What it tells you is that every month you are going to borrow more and more. And the point of borrowing is the sovereign bonds and domestic bonds, not concessionary loans. In fact, I always say that our problem as Africa today is not even World Bank. When you discuss World Bank, you're missing the point. Your plunder of your economy is on the sovereign bonds and domestic debts, because the interest rates are very prohibitive. If we can, as a people, start that conversation and put governments to task, then we'll lift ourselves off this debt burden. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me add my 2 cents to this issue. It's very interesting. And I take a lead from Justice Daniel's golden words, I would call it. That knowledge is power, corruption thrives from ignorance. Now, the major problem today is that people really don't understand this, what I call as a money cycle. Now, where are these debts coming from? Who is doing it? Where is it going? Where is the money going? Because, finance is a very interesting art. It's an art. Or what I call passing money from hand to hand until it finally disappears. So when my friend said, and it's very interesting, you borrow a debt which never comes to your country. So where does it disappear? So it is parked somewhere in somebody's bank account, and most of these tax-haven countries are made for that. So they are made, so this is a very interesting great money cycle. Maybe we can have a seminar on this money cycle. That whole debt issue is created by basically the big four companies. So you have McKinsey coming into your country, you have E&Ys and Deloittes, and they are telling the government, look, do this. This is what happened in this $1 billion Malaysian issue. So they give you an idea. If you do this, then this is going to happen. One of the classic cases in India was the McKinsey came up with this concept of a smart city, though we indigenized it. But the whole idea after 5 years said, no, this is not working. Now all the money, everything that comes for that project. Now actually what happens is, if suppose you get $1 trillion debt, now these people who are giving you debt, they say we have got consultants. We have got the people who are manufacturing it. We are people who are doing this, so you give the money to them. So the money virtually doesn't come to the country, but it is spent on those very people who are giving the debt. So their industries are thriving more. Now coming to the point which I missed it earlier, why India? What has India done in last 10 years? Why it has become a leader, and why we are looking at 2047 as being the third or the second largest economy in the world? The basic issue is make in India. That was the greatest job of the Prime Minister. The moment he came, he says, no, this doesn't work. We will be indigenous. We'll pick up everything that is indigenous. We will make it in our country. You see, we are as good as any other people here. Why are we obsessed about this Western allies? I would say South and South versus Western allies. Now this whole group of Western allies are intertwined. They're very, very interestingly, and the whole money economic cycle is so brilliantly being run for last 300 years. And I tell you frankly, again from Justice Daniel's word, we are ignorant about it. How many people are in your country or in our country are actually aware of this money cycle? There are people who are behind these prime banks. There are prime banks who run the LBMA. If you go and somebody sees the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Exchange, Market Association. There are 9 banks who are running it. France, one is from France, one is from Deutsche Bank, there is London Bank, there is Morgan's. Now these people control the entire economy. And what happens to the sovereign bonds? Have you ever thought of what happens to the sovereign bonds? You see, what happens, let me tell you. A sovereign bond, if I issue a sovereign bond for say $1 billion on an interest rate of 7% payable after 30 years. So one thing is you are mortgaging your country for 30 years. Secondly, what happens is after 30 years, now this 1 billion bond pays an interest, simple interest of 7% means $210 billion. So after 30 years, this 100 billion bond, 100 billion worth of a sovereign bond, whatever currency it is, becomes $310 billion. So the value of that bond which is issued today is $310 billion. Now this is sold at a premium rate to these banks. At what? At $90 billion. They exchange from one hand to another hand to another. There are almost, each bank makes billions of dollars every day, every moment. There are virtually, you see, there are 206 countries in the world. Every country is minting money. What is minting money? A paper which you take out of a tree is converted into a currency. So the currency worth, say, 1,000 rupee note or whatever the currency, a dollar, which is say $1,000, $100, is not even 10 cents. So virtually from the nature, the paper is coming from the nature. So that 10% of a paper is being converted into $100 of a currency. Now wait, so this is so the entire wealth of the world is rising every moment, and every 206 countries are doing it. Every 206 countries are creating sovereign bonds. Who is purchasing them? Where the money disappear? Where it is parked? Now this is something which sometimes I think very rightly, and as pointed to my learned friend, the judiciary will have to go into it. There's no other person who will go into it. Because the knowledge is the domain of judiciary. And knowledge alone is a light which goes to the darkness. Incidentally, there's a very interesting story of a darkness going to the gods and say, look, the sun is, troubling us every day. The sun says, but where is the darkness? I can't see it. And that is exactly what happens with the judiciary. They say, where is corruption? Because the corruption is so, wherever I go, there's always light. Now, with the rise of the civil society, which I call the global, which I've done a book which is called the Legal Revolution 5.0. It is the judiciary. You see, this is power. There are three basic energies in the world which we call power, money, and knowledge. In our Hindu philosophy, we call it Saraswati, Durga, and Lakshmi. So there are three feminine energies which rule the world in this, what I call the cosmic universe. Now, these three energies, the power was at one point of time at the top when Alexander started from one end to the other end. Then the money took over when colonization took over. And now, after this COVID cosmic kick, I call it a cosmic kick, because everybody have now understood that health, environment, education, knowledge, all these metaphysical things are more important for life than just the material thing of money. So there is a big mega shift to this, what I call the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension of life. And if we are aware of it, maybe you're not going to streets. Otherwise, like Iran and other countries, the things are going to be in a bad shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Gupta. I think what you have said is actually on the point. And like you say, if you were to sell everything, if God forbid the world was to go into liquidation, and you sell all the assets, all the minerals and the buildings and everything, the money that you will remain with, that paper, will actually be 80% of what is in circulation, which means that there is oversupply of this dollar thing you call money. The important thing is coming back to economic justice, which starts from distributive justice, then divided into social justice and economic justice, so that we have horizontal and vertical. The Gen Zs are very clever, the young people of Kenya. They have, if you look at their point of entry, they actually targeted the finance bill. They were saying, this budget, this bill as it is oppressive to the people. That made me think, Dimas, because what have we been talking about? If you talk about justice, human rights, and all that, the rule of law, at the end of the day, it translates to something that is tangible to the individual at the household level, which the young people of this country, of our countries, were not feeling. They went ahead and said, look, this finance bill is, among other items, is unjust. It is against the human rights provisions of the Constitution. And Mark, you, in the human rights sphere, over the years we have been talking about the right to be heard, all these other rights except the justiciability and enjoyment of actual rights and economic benefits, which is the ultimate of what we seek in this life. So we as an organization and as a people, we have the duty to join them to actually realize our economic rights, our right to health, housing, and I think India has tried this in the public interest litigation over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give everyone 1 minute just to do closing remarks. But also for the Kenyans, reflect on now the country is there. I've seen some documents where for you to get an ID, you'll have to pay 1,000 shillings. There is the matter that is being litigated about registration of IMEI numbers. We are part of that litigation. And it looks like our data, our money, is trying to be weaponized against us, by the state, so that you offer up all your data for them to be able to pick up taxes, which really should not be the case. So, yeah, go, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Demas. I think first and foremost we need to tackle the issue of debt, to tackle the broad issue of debt. We have to, as a country or globally, rethink some of the policies that or the positions that government takes, because it can't be open season that year in year out the state is just borrowing and not being checked on how much they can borrow. So we have to have a candid discussion about borrowing, or we risk being in a scenario whereby we're in a vicious cycle of repayment, whereby even ourselves will not be able to repay what is owed by the country what's owed by the country, or even the younger generation may not be able to pay what is owed by the country. But more importantly, as Willis had said, it may not be what is owed by the country, but what has been stolen by some specific individuals. So, which brings me to the next point. We also have to deal comprehensively with the issue of corruption. In my honest opinion, if we can't deal with the cancer of corruption, then we may not also comprehensively deal with the issue of debt, because people still, I steal colossal amounts of money and nobody is held to account. So if we don't learn how to hold, those who have been who have stolen a lot of public funds to account, and by holding them to account, maybe Kenyans may just have to think may be tempted to go the China way, because as is. Those who have looted a lot of public funds seem to have manipulated the legal system to a great extent. So we must comprehensively think of how do you deal with the cancer of corruption. The third thing is how do you also comprehensively, how do you rethink, those who serve us in public office? Because I always think if we got rid of the class of 1986 and 1992, and by 1986 I mean Raila Odinga and all those who joined with him, and by 1992 I mean our current president, President William Ruto, and all that class of his. If we got rid of all those class of political leaders, let's just start afresh. Let's give, whoever is there, because I think Kenya's biggest problem is that we just have the same monkeys in different jungles. They keep, if you look at the current president, he's just, I don't know how to interpret that in English, but he's like a surrogate of the Kano regime, if I may say, because this fellow started politicking in 1992. Raila started politicking, I think, in 1980. We are in 2024, and these are the same fellows who get to make for us decisions. And yet we're a country of 50 million. We just need to get rid of these fellows. Maybe they're part of the problem. Let's get rid of them. Let's have Demas as our president, or any of you inside here. Let's start afresh, because at least with Demas, or even Willis, if he was the president, if he messed up, we will ship him out even before 5 years. But this current crop of fellows, we can't ship them out. They are the system, and the system is them, right? And if you look at all those who have, they're the same ones who have actually been part of borrowing, either directly or indirectly. More recently, you had, a few months ago, you had the government of convenience, all the three musketeers saying that, some borrowing decisions are actually good for us, only for them to make U-turns. So, in my honest opinion, I think for us as a country to progress further, to address the huge debt issue or the economic burden, we just need to get rid of those fellows. If we don't, I just don't think we'll make significant strides.
Martin, point taken.
Yes.
1 minute, please.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All I'm going to say is this. We've litigated, we've advocated on political rights. It's now time we advocate and litigate on economic justice. And I say this, I know lawyers will have fees. What is at stake are your fees in future. You imagine that whatever fees you are promised, 30% of it has already been taken. So if a client was going to pay you money, you already lost it even before you earn it. That is what economic justice is about. So fees is at risk. And I urge my colleagues, let's now move, if that is what is going to make us act. Let's now move to protect the fees by litigating these issues of economic justice and, more importantly, debt.
Gupta, before you continue, is there anything you would like to say about India and the issue of tax justice as you wrap up? Tax justice. Tax justice.
Tax is a necessary evil. Governments have to run, and for running of the government, and as my learned friend said, salary is a major issue. So almost like today, I would say about, and maybe in every country it must be about 7 to 8% of the total employment is run by the government. And there's a big revenue expenditure. But the major expenditure which really eats into the government budget, and I look at the budget every year and just check up how much interest we have to pay. And well, 80% Kenya is paying. We are paying around 24%. And even America is paying. America's today, they have got something like 46 trillion debt. Which is huge. They've got huge, but they don't care. They continue to print dollars. But somebody will have to really do, and again, somebody will have to really go deep into this structure of debt economy. And there's another parallel economy which people have not seen, is the insurance economy. So I wrote an article on this. I call this the world bankers and fund managers, and I call them Lakshmi and Kuber. So Lakshmi is the deity who keeps the earned money, and Kuber is a Rakshas who keep the exploited money. So these are two types of money. He says the issue is money is neutral. How you earn the money is a major issue. Now the people who this large quantum of money, which is today, I don't know whether people are aware, the total quantum of money and assets in the world is something like $360 trillion. And this $360 trillion, the total number of derivatives which have been created. Now that is a whole issue of derivatives. The derivatives is $1.2 zillion. The whole, you see, because somebody has to study on this, and this is where the economic issues, and there's debt economy and tax structures, and the worst part is if I work 85 hours and an American works 1 hour, we are equivalent. Because $1 is equivalent to 85 rupees. So I have to continue to work more and more. I will never be able to match that. And all this, the tax structure, you see, in India, incidentally, we have got a 35% taxation, which is the maximum. But again, the taxation regime is good, and fundamentally, since the GST started, the amount of tax collection, which is a very, very strong and very strongly opposed decision, which was taken by the Prime Minister, of implementing of the GST. The revenue collection in India has gone dramatically up. Because end of the day, every transaction has a tax in it. Because if you see the taxation laws, every event where the money passes from one end to another is taxed, which we call the taxing event. And as a result of this GST issue, the taxation is going high. And that is the confidence, I think. That is a great confidence that the Prime Minister has, that we will be a dominant power in 20. And you see, India is ready to take the lead, but we have to fight it out. The whole BRIC movements, the whole South to South and South, this whole issue has basically been taken by the Prime Minister, and India is taking the lead to act as a shield, a very strong shield against these Western allies. And these Western allies are butchering, they are not leaving silent. So there'll be, riots in your country, there'll be wars all over, because ultimately there's a lot of war economy. So how to deal with it, and what will be the strong role of judiciary in it? And I think the jurists, if they really come up together globally, and at least at the Commonwealth level, then maybe we are able to do something effectively and work as a strong shield.
Thank you. Gupta, when an Indian like you works for 1 hour, I have to work 1.5 hours.
I have to work 85 hours for $1.
And then for the American, you have 85 hours. I have to work 135 hours for their 1 hour. And for those of us who came from Nairobi, when you go to the streets and you wonder, how do I exchange the rupees against the Kenya shillings against the dollar? Just know that it's simple mathematics. 1.5 hours is what you add to the money you are holding in your pocket. 1.5 multiplied by 1.5. Now, that's basically what is important. There are two books. The first book was written by Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. They come with these policies, and like Gupta says, they print the money. Because, like they say, the US Reserve Bank, all of these currencies are pegged on the dollar, the universal currency. Then they have the US Reserve Bank. There's nothing reserved. Reserve is supposed to be gold. They don't have any gold there. It's a vault, like what you have in Egypt. There's a hole inside there, in the pyramid. So they tell you there's a reserve bank. There's no reserve there. They print paper and they give it to you. So when they're broke, they just print it, literally. When they're broke, you can't, for whatever reason. Now, coming from that, they do policies. And they do structural adjustment programs, which are pushed down your throat. They tell you, sell all your corporations, including the ones that run your economy, because they are not managed. In my dissertation in 1995, if the problem is management, change the management, don't sell the asset. I thought that's what they should have told us. Why do you sell it? But they came with SAPs. They told you, sell all your parastatals. They went up with a lot of them. They took your wealth, gave you paper money. Now, after that, they came with MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. Again, then they say, this is not working. Let's try something, because the problem with Africa is, like Willie said, is management. But then they don't deal with your management issues. They actually corrupt them more. For our judiciary, there is, we the people, there's Albie Sachs in South Africa. He was a member of ANC, activist for many years. Then they got into power and he became a judge. So he was a judge from the opposition. And he couldn't believe that now he's a judge to implement the very things they were talking about in the opposition. I think at some time they ended up even jailing their own president. If you read his book, Albie Sachs, We the People, the Mindset of an Activist Judge, you will see the dynamics between enforcing the law that you believe in and finding yourself in that shadow that Gupta was talking about, that there's corruption, but you don't see it. In closing, I believe it is for us all to work to actualize the economic justice that we have enacted under the 46th Amendment in India and under Article 43 of the Kenyan Constitution. Thank you.